What are the 3 important reasons to track your systems? Over the last couple of episodes, we've looked at this interesting definition of what a system is. And I actually looked up on the internet and said, hey, what are the definitions of the systems that are out there at the moment? That's quite interesting. You can type this into Google and things like a set of things working together as parts of a mechanism or an interconnecting network, a complex whole. Okay, whatever that means. That's, I don't know what you made of that. Number 2, a set of principles or procedures according to which something is done, an organized scheme or method. Okay, so that's got some elements of what we've been talking about over the last couple of days. And the last one, the prevailing political or social order, especially when regarded as oppressive or intransigent. Well, okay, yeah, not really what we're after. So that second one's the closest, but I've been giving you a different definition of a system, a repeatable, tracked actions that lead to defined results. Repeatable tracked actions that lead to defined results. And we've been through each of these words over the last 3 episodes. The first one we covered repeatable, that the idea of a system being something that can be done over and over again, either on a schedule or on demand. The second thing we looked at was the idea of defined results. That a system gives defined results, and it does that because the actions are done the same each time. Now, they do not have to be perfect, but within the tolerance of the defined results, they're going to have to be reasonably close. If you skip out on actions or you complete them in the wrong order, then you are unlikely to get those defined results. And it also gives you the ability to look at the results that you got and say, hey, is that what I wanted? Is that the defined result that I wanted? And if not, then you can go back and look at the actions and say, hey, these actions gave that result. I don't want that result. What would have to change? So the actions we discussed yesterday. And that leaves one more word, tracked. Tracked. Interesting idea. Now, if you don't track your systems, is the sky going to fall? No, it's not. But there are 3 important reasons why you do want to do this. Now, realize that there is a cost to tracking your systems. It takes work to say, hey, I'm going to track this. I'm going to mark when I'm beginning work on this, when I'm working on a particular aspect of a system, a particular set of actions, and perhaps even some of those defined results. So I'm tracking the actions I'm taking and I'm tracking the results. And there's a cost to that. Like, you got to train yourself and train your team to say, hey, this is important. And so it helps to know why it is important. Why would you want to track it? Well, here we go. Let's number 1. Number 1 reason you want to track your systems is you can tell who's on what. Now, this may not come into play and won't come into play if it's just you. If you're a solopreneur and you're just working yourself, then there's no conflict between who's got what. But as your team grows and you begin to have multiple team members working on bigger projects, it helps to know who's working on what, so that they can see, hey, we're going to be held up here if that's not done on this time. But also so that you don't get on each other's toes, that you're not doing the same work that somebody else was doing already. You're like, man, I wish we hadn't done that because you were already doing that. You just might have wasted 1, 2, 3 hours, perhaps even 1, 2, 3 days doing work that was already being done by another, but you couldn't see it because it wasn't being tracked. So reason number 1, you can tell who's doing what. Second, now this applies across the board, you can tell where you're up to. You can tell where you're up to. You see, if you don't track your systems, unless it's the most basic small system where you can get through it in half an hour or less. And you don't need to really track that unless you're going to get distracted all the time. Actually, you know what? Guess what happens? People get distracted all the time. You probably should track your systems all the time, even if it's only a 20-minute system. Why? Because if you get distracted, you can come back and see where you're up to. If the day ends, you can come back and see where you're up to. This is kind of like marking a book. If you're reading a book and you have to go to sleep or you have to go and do something else, most people will mark that, either with a bookmark or folding the page down. Why do you do that? Well, it takes a lot of time to flick through the book and find out where you are up to. And this is exactly the same with your work when you're using systems. Like if you have that long list of actions that need to be taken, and hopefully you've broken them up nicely so you can track them via processes, but even then you might go down into the detail. And if you can keep the position that you're up to, then you know when to return to that work, where to return to that work. You're like, oh, there it is. And you can begin quickly. Instead of taking the average estimate is 5 to 6 minutes per distraction to refine the place that they were up to. Why? Because they didn't mark it. They didn't track it, but you track it. Suddenly you look where you're up to, and within 10, 20, 30 seconds, the computer completely shuts down and you lose everything. You bring it back up. If your system was tracked, then you can have all of the instructions, all of the materials, all of the pages that you're working on up and ready, maybe within 1 or 2 minutes. That typically would be a 15, 20-minute experience as people looked for all of those links, went through their files trying to find the files, and maybe they went to their recents and they're like, oh yeah, okay, was it that one? But their naming schemes aren't so great, so they have to open 4 documents. Oh, here it is. And now, oh, where's that back end page? I've got to log in, I've got to find the back end page. You track all that fast. Your teams actually start producing dramatically faster because you're tracking, and suddenly that time expense of investing into tracking starts to massively pay off. Yeah, it might take 5 seconds, 2 seconds to track. If you've got modern project management software, then this is pretty easy to do. You just click the button and select the right one. If you're on Asana, if you're on ClickUp, if you're on Monday, this is all very basic stuff for that type of software. You click, you're working on, click done. But if you can recover quickly, then you are adding 5 to 6 minutes per standard distraction, distraction instruction turns into destruction. Anyway, but in a big event, in a destructive event where the power goes off and you lose everything, you back up much quicker than 15 minutes. Now, there's a third reason though. You see, if you're a business owner, you're paying your team, you might have an awkward situation where you come to payroll and you're like, man, what am I paying for? What got done? And sure, you can have your teams document everything that got done. But if you're tracking, it's all right there. You can just go through and see your team's work for the week. You're like, oh, let's pull up Tom, have a look at what happened with Tom. And there will all be the systems and the results and the processes all tracked. And so you can know who's performing, who's doing well, because you can see their workloads. Suddenly, you don't need to have kind of weird, intrusive screen monitoring software or any of that stuff, which takes a lot of time to look at anyway. But you can just see the work getting done. You can see who's performing, you can see where you're up to, you can see what you are paying for. You can speak to your team members before it becomes a problem and say, hey, what's going on with your performance? Perhaps there's something going on in their life, something big, and it's like, hey, you want to know about that. It's not that they're just underperforming, but perhaps there's some bad things happening in their life and they need to talk about it. And when that clears up, then their production goes back. Or perhaps they've been thinking about leaving you. They're like, you know what, I'm sick of working here. And you're like, oh, really? Interesting. Okay, yeah, I noticed that your performance has been dropping off. They're like, how did you know that? Well, we looked at the reports. It's all tracked. But this requires you to think that the investment in tracking is worth it. So there are the 3 reasons why you want to track your systems. Number 1, you can tell who's working on what. Number 2, you can tell where everybody is up to. And number 3, you can tell what got done each week. All right, I hope you got some value out of that. If you want to go back and review this entire conversation, I'd certainly recommend that. It's this episode and the last 4 where we cover the definition of a system. I hope that you find it far more valuable than the ones that you'll find on Google. And if you want some help with setting up your systems so that you can have repeatable tracked actions that lead to defined results, then head over to systemio.dev. Thanks for tuning in today. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode as we continue this journey into the power of systems to create results. See you then.